Hi guys, it's Geekonomics here. Today I'm going to do a little video on the law of absolute and comparative advantage, and these are the things I'm going to be covering today: absolute advantage, comparative advantage, opportunity costs and opportunity cost ratios, and trading possibility frontiers. If you have had a chance to look at the June 2016 pre-release material, you will see that the law of absolute and comparative advantage will probably, in some shape, form or fashion, form part of that exam. Very important, therefore, that through the course of your A2 studies you learn about the law of absolute and comparative advantage. So without further ado, let us begin. So what I've got here is a table, and you can see that the units that we're talking about here, we're talking about units of output. So I've got a table here for the number of units of output for cars and bananas that can be produced in both the UK and Madeira. And the first thing we're going to be considering is the top line here, the absolute advantage. Now, a country is said to have an absolute advantage in the production of that good or service which it can produce the most of in absolute terms, or alternatively at the lowest possible cost. It's quite clear-cut in this example. In terms of cars, the UK can produce 10, Madeira can produce 20. In terms of bananas, the UK can produce 20, Madeira can produce 30. So it's quite clear that Madeira produces more cars than the UK, and so would be said to have the absolute advantage in the production of cars. And similarly, Madeira produces more bananas, and so would be said to have the absolute advantage in the production of bananas. You need to be very careful with the units. This one, as you can see, it clearly says what we're talking about, units of output here. If that didn't say output, if rather it said costs, then obviously that would impact on your relative absolute advantages, because now to produce a car in the UK, that would be cost per unit, by the way, so it costs 10, let's say for international comparisons purposes, it's US dollars we're talking here, 10 US dollar in the UK, 20 in Madeira. So therefore, in terms of what we're talking about here, absolute advantage, it's quite clear that Madeira does not have the absolute advantage when it is cost-based. That would be the UK would have the absolute advantage, costing 10 rather than 20. And similarly, the UK would have the absolute advantage in bananas, 20 USD rather than 30 USD. So that's just something to be on the lookout for. I'm using tables. Those of you who follow the OCR textbook will see that on page, I think it's around page 239, 240, 241, rather than use tables, the OCR textbook tends to use diagrams like this. So you might have, say for the UK, you'd have 10 cars, 20 bananas, and they're just linking those up together. It's the same thing, but I prefer to do it by way of tables, and I hope that you understand what follows. So that's a very simple explanation of absolute advantage. So we can see, if we go back to our units of output measure, sorry, I'm just trying to hold this camera at the same time. So we're going to just get rid of this and go back to units of output. Based upon output, Madeira has the absolute advantage, 20 and 30. But we need to ask ourselves, is there any basis for trade to take place here? Should either country specialise in one or other of the goods and then engage in trade? Well, in order to find out whether or not trade should take place, we need to then consider comparative advantage. which country has the lowest possible opportunity cost in terms of its production. And in order to do that, we need to look at opportunity cost ratios. The textbook definition of comparative advantage is that a country tends to have a comparative advantage in the production of that good and or service which it can produce at the lowest possible opportunity cost. And so I'm going to move across now to another table just to work through a little very simple example of the law of comparative advantage. So you can see in this table, once again we're talking about output. I've changed the figures slightly just to make things easy for us. And so what we're going to do first of all is we're going to work out going from left to right, we're going to work out the relative opportunity costs. So you can see that the UK produces either 10 cars or 20 bananas. Now, in terms of a ratio, that clearly means that for every one car that the UK produces, they can produce 2 bananas. So we get a ratio there of 1 to 2. And in Madeira, the ratio is 1 to 3. Now, if you go back to our definition of comparative advantage, a country has a comparative advantage where it produces a good or service at the lowest possible opportunity cost. So back across to this example, which country has the lowest possible opportunity cost? In other words, if either country wanted to produce one more car, which country would have to give up the least number of bananas? And it's quite clear that in this instance, the UK, because it only gives up 2 bananas rather than 3, the UK gives up the least number of bananas. Therefore, the UK is said to have the comparative advantage in the production of cars. So I'm just writing that on there, the UK cars, said to have a comparative advantage. Now, given that there are only 2 countries and 2 goods, one would assume, of course, that Madeira has the comparative advantage in the production of bananas. But it's not sufficient to assume, we need proof. And our proof, ladies and gentlemen, we want to do an opportunity cost ratio, but we want to work this backwards from right to left, from these figures. So we can see that for every 1 banana produced, the UK could produce half a car. So I'm going right to left, remember, so it's 1 to a half. When we're working right to left, we're then dealing with which country has the comparative advantage for the good which is on the right. So it's bananas in this case. So it's 1 to a half there, and in the in Madeira, it is 1 to a third. Think again of our definition of comparative advantage. Which country has the lowest possible opportunity cost here? Well, it's Madeira, because they only give up a third of a unit of a car, whereas in the UK, they give up half. And so that is, as we anticipated, as we thought, as we suspected, Madeira has the comparative advantage in bananas. Now, on that basis, the UK ought to specialise in cars, Madeira ought to specialise in bananas, and then they ought to trade with one another. And if they do so, both countries should be mutually better off. Well, to what extent they will be mutually beneficial, to what extent they will be better off, we need to then finally look at this, which is the trading possibility frontier. And I'm going to draw the trading possibility frontiers based upon these opportunity costs which we identified earlier. And this, it may sound complicated, but it's quite straightforward. So I'm going to draw a set of axes. And on the vertical, I'm going to have cars. On the horizontal, the nanas, bananas. Okay, we can see that in the UK, well, back to our opportunity cost ratios, for every car they produce, they have to give up 2 bananas. So we have a ratio there of 1 to 2. So all we need to do is identify a point for 1 car, identify a point for 2 bananas, because that's what the opportunity cost ratio is, and then join the two together to give us our trading possibility frontier for the UK. We do the same then for Madeira. Their ratio is 1 to 3. Its ratio is 1 to 3. So again, starting from the same place, but then 3. You have to bear with me here. I realise this is not the neatest. It's harder holding this camera than I thought, than I anticipated. So now we've got our 2 TPFs, they're called in your textbook, our 2 trading possibility frontiers. And it's this area here between the 2 TPFs, between the 2 trading possibility frontiers. Any trade which takes place between those 2 countries within that area will make both countries better off. And we need to think about why that is. So what is the UK going to do with this, back to our opportunity cost ratio? They're going to send this 1 car to Madeira. Now, if they gave up a car domestically and opted to produce bananas instead, we can see from the opportunity cost ratio that they could forego that 1 car and produce 2 bananas instead. Now what they're doing is they're foregoing the 1 car, but they want something back in return which will make the trade more favourable for them. What would make it more favourable is if they received more than 2 bananas from Madeira. And so if we look at our trading possibility frontier, anywhere to the right of the UK's TPF, trading possibility frontier, would indicate that they're going to receive more bananas, more than 2 bananas anyway, in return for the 1 car that they sent to Madeira. Madeira, on the other hand, they could either produce 1 car themselves, but they would have to give up 3 bananas. So when they receive this 1 car themselves, to make the trade better for them, they would have to give up fewer bananas, fewer than 3 bananas. And so on our trading possibility frontier, any trade which takes place to the left of their TPF, so basically anywhere in this shaded area here, will make Madeira better off. And so this area here, ladies and gentlemen, this area we would be describing as the area where mutually beneficial trade takes place. So, okay folks, I hope that's been of some use. Just getting used to this new equipment, but it's a work in progress, and I'll be back hopefully with quite a few more videos. I've got a lot of things in the pipeline and lined up. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.